like I said, Africa has a potential big problem, but also potentially a huge opportunity. I think that there is a very big need for upskilling the, like hundreds of millions of youth.
And we will talk about the trends and the future of gaming and game-based learning in Africa. Hi, Hugo.
Hi, Philip.
All right, so I will introduce you quickly to Hugo. So he's a professional agile project manager with over 9 years of experience in various facets of game design, game production, and project management. He is building and leading geographically dispersed teams, working collaboratively and applying critical and creative thinking to solve different challenges. He is also the founder of Maliyo Games and is becoming really a very famous person in the gaming world in Africa, not only in Africa, but internationally as well. But we will talk about this in a minute. So I'm very happy to have you on board, Hugo. And I want to start right in, and I want to ask you the question, what is your favorite game right now?
So, I mean, like, would it be okay if I chose one of my games as my favorite game?
Of course, yeah.
So my favorite game right now is one of our games called What King. It's a card matching game that we developed. It's based around the classic African traditional tabletop game called What. Our version is called What King, and it has multiple gameplay modes. So you have a single player mode, you have a multiplayer mode, and you also have an adventure mode. And we really invested a lot of time in designing the user experience, sort of like introducing like great visual effects and sound effects into the game. And it's actually a really pleasant game to play, especially the offline single player mode. You can just play it on your own. We put a time cap, so the maximum amount of time that it takes for a single session is around 4 minutes. So whenever I'm a little bit bored and I just need, especially when I'm waiting on, just about to jump on a call, I can just quickly have a quick session before I get on the call. So that's my personal favorite.
I saw that it raised a lot of awareness, that game as well, right?
Yes. So in terms of just reach, we have over 100,000 installs on the game. But more importantly than just the install numbers is the user ratings. So we have 4.4 star user ratings, which is quite decent. For a game overall, I think our target is around 4.2, so we're over that. And also the day one retention is pretty good, around 34%, which is not bad. It could be better, but at least I think our target was 30%, so we're quite happy that it's over that target. So
very good, congratulations on that. But what brought you to the gaming world? So what is your personal story?
Thank you. So my foray into gaming was purely accidental. It was never intentional. So I've got an economics and finance background. I studied in the University of Manchester. I worked as a finance analyst at General Electric in London. And there was nothing about me that said that I should go into gaming. As a child, I played games, but I wasn't necessarily very, I wasn't the most active game player, like any other person. I just enjoyed playing games, both the traditional tabletop games, again, what, Ludo, chess, which I was never good at, and then obviously the digital games with FIFA and Need for Speed, and Call of Duty and games like that. So after my time at General Electric, I ran my own first startup, which was a recruitment startup, helping some of the biggest companies in the world, Goldman Sachs, Bank of England, Google at the time, to find diverse talents from UK universities. And that was a really fun experience. That was my very first startup. And I decided that I wanted to move back to Africa. Whilst making that decision, I wanted to be in tech. Because tech was also something that I had a lot of passion for. And I was having a chat with a friend of mine who then said, why don't you look at the gaming industry? And when I realized that the gaming industry was a multi-billion-dollar industry, I was like, oh my God, this creates two great opportunities for Africa. So one is just economic empowerment. where we can, create meaningful jobs for individuals by, essentially creating a new industry that didn't exist at the time. And then the other one was actually introducing diversity within the global gaming scene. Games are really about immersive experiences, and different people have different sort of like viewpoints on that immersion. And the gaming world is always looking for something new. Nobody wants to play, Need for Speed or Grand Theft Auto or Call of Duty forever. There's always the need for something new. So I was very curious around what could Africa bring into the global gaming scene. And yeah, what started off as like an exploration, 10 years down the line, we are developing the gaming industry in Africa as we speak.
Mm-hmm. And speaking about developing the gaming scene in Africa, tell us a bit about Maliyo and the boot camps that you are doing.
Yeah, so Maliyo was the gaming studio that I founded. We kind of like our mission is to create African-inspired games. So like games based around African themes, narrative, characters, sounds, stories. And that's kind of like what the mission of the organization was. When we kicked off, we built some really simple prototypes and really got the market excited. Everybody loved the idea of kind of like stories that were like locally relevant. People loved it. And we tried, obviously back in 2012, the market was massively fragmented. We also focused purely on mobile because Africa is a mobile first market, and consoles and PCs isn't as readily distributed, isn't as accessible as mobile. So we purely focus on mobile, and most of my references will be related to mobile. So one of the biggest challenges that we found was that we were not able to scale up our production because we couldn't find talents within the local market. Most of the individuals that we were able to hire technically were self-taught individuals. And the challenge with self-taught individuals is that they obviously are learning without any sort of like predefined structure. And when you bring them into teams, it creates a lot of conflict because they've all learned in different ways and they all have different types of knowledge. So bringing them together just meant the likelihood of failed projects was extremely high. And that was really frustrating. And that hampered our growth for the longest period of time, until in late 2019, I realized that actually what we should be doing is to build the foundation within which the gaming industry in Africa was going to sit. And this problem wasn't just unique to Maliyo. It was across the board. For most companies within sub-Saharan Africa, everybody had the same problem of, sort of like ramping up their teams, ramping up production, and the lack of competent talent to enable them to do that. So we designed a gaming curriculum in late 2019 and kicked that off in 2020. Fortunately / unfortunately, COVID happened. I mean, unfortunate in that obviously it caused a lot of disruption to everybody, but fortunate in that it changed our approach to running this bootcamp. So when we designed it in the traditional way, in person, physical, tutor-led. So like, you come in and there's a trainer who just sort of like supports you for a 3-month period, running you through the curriculum. Because we couldn't get together anymore, we had to make it online. And by making it online, we had to make it self-paced and project-based. So we redesigned the curriculum to then say, you learn at your own pace, and then you do projects, which is evaluated every single time you complete one of the courses. And then the other thing that it did is that it made us realize that actually the best talent isn't necessarily concentrated in one location. So we could make the curriculum accessible to anybody, anywhere, at any time, and just essentially source talent from this kind of like diverse pool of talent. So today, we've been able to hire from that program, and we have teams in 4 different African countries and 12 different African cities. And obviously, this is enabling us bring in some of the best people across the continent to help us kind of like design the games for Africa.
Very interesting. Speaking about accessibility, you now mentioned the challenge of, getting the right people for as developers and coders and game artists, basically. But let's change the perspective. Speaking about challenges in Africa and accessibility, digital divide, inclusion, who has access to your games? In terms of the target group, do we still have a problem there in Africa, or do we have the frog leap that everyone has access to devices, internet, and so on?
Well, let's be frank, everybody doesn't have access. And like it's a subset of a market that we target. So for instance, our games are mobile, so you have to have a mobile device. Our games are designed for smartphones, so you have to have a smartphone, not just a mobile device. And then you also have different types of smartphones. You need to have the right capacity for your device. You need to have enough storage in your device to be able to run these games. And then there's also the question around education and literacy. Discoverability is still a big challenge for Africans because there's always a third-party dependency for discoverability. I think the discoverability is a big problem everywhere.
Yeah.
Because you need to invest time to discover new content. So I think that, and then you have sort of like your rural urban divide where internet connectivity is more prevalent in urban areas and rural areas is a lot more dispersed just because of population density. So I think that, so access is not for every single person, but if people have the right connectivity, they can still have access to the content because it's available to everyone.
Okay. And what do you think? How is this developing in the next 5 years? And also, perhaps you can add to your answer, what do you think is the potential of game-based learning in Africa?
So I think that obviously the interesting thing about next 5 years is Africa has a massive youth population. Like it's seen as obviously a strength and potentially a problem as well. But the question is, how do you navigate that problem? Because like it's not a problem that's going to disappear, right? Africa has a very, very large youth population. I think depending on what stat you're looking at, but something like 65% of Africa's population is under the age of 25. So you are looking at the next 5 years, a lot of really young people, getting into adulthood, moving into the job market. And how do you empower them? How do you upskill them? And this is where sort of like your gamified learning comes into play. Because gamified learning is really, the whole concept of gamification is kind of like applying gaming concepts to non-gaming environments. And it provides a lot more immersive experience for the end user. Our training curriculum, as an example, is designed around gamification. We have some gamification systems that are built into it. It's self-paced, right? So like people can learn on their own if they have the right equipment and are committed. And it's really about upskilling individuals that have existing. We consider our training program as a conversion course. So taking people with their existing knowledge and then converting them into game developers because we think that they can actually start a career really rapidly. So after 5 months of training, you can really start to kind of like build your gaming career once you're done with that training program. So I think like there is a potential, there's a strong benefit for gamified learning, because if you think about traditional learning online, if you're sat by your own on your computer, just typing a bunch of codes or doing a bunch of assignments, unlike traditional learning where you have a tutor sat there and giving you feedback in real time, you have to embed this feedback system into the learning portal. And that's really what that is one of the things what gamified learning provides, so that the user is not interacting with like real individuals, but is interacting with the system and understanding how they're able to progress. So a very simple example of that is for each of the course modules that we have within our learning management system. When a user completes the course, they have to do a project. They do a project and do a submission. Somebody reviews that submission at the back end and provides them with feedback. But they also need to complete a quiz. And they have to score a minimum 60% before they allow access to the next course. and they can only take those quiz, I think, a maximum of 5 times before they then get locked out and they have to, sort of like restart all over again. So that is a gamified system. Obviously, you have addition of like badges. You have all of the notifications that are built into the system that notifies the user when they've made progress and like, what they've achieved. And then in addition to all of that, we also have a peer-to-peer support community where if you have questions, you can pop the questions into the learning management system, and your peers can see those questions and prefer answers to you. And you can also look through the history of questions that have been asked in the past to see if somebody has asked a similar question before and what responses they received, and encourage support a large group of learners using a gamified system for that. Yeah, but anyway, that's kind of like my thinking around.
No, it's super interesting. I'm wondering if you think that this kind of game-based learning or gamified learning that you just described could be applied also in other sectors or areas in Africa. Do you think there are any restrictions or limitations?
No, I don't see any restrictions or limitations. I mean, like when you design, you need to design. It depends on the audience. So for our system is designed to work very well in traditional laptops and desktop environments, but also runs very smoothly on mobile. But the reason why ours is optimized for desktop and laptop is because it's a programming course, and most people who are programming are using some form of laptop or desktop to do the programming. So that's the expectation around that. But you can also design much lighter systems that do not require people to use laptops and are just using their mobile phones, as I am talking to you right now on my mobile phone, where they can interact with the content and again have this kind of like peer community component built into it. There is another thing that I think is also very beneficial when I start thinking about sort of like the peer-to-peer learning, which is kind of like cohort-based learning. So learning as a pack rather than learning in isolation. So I think like when you learn in isolation, you lose that kind of like group mentality, that kind of like group effort, like, the kind of like the idea that, collectively we are stronger than individually kind of thing. So that's another thing that I think might also work. And then I love the Pan-Africanism of our learning community. So that idea that we can have learners, all learning games in Ghana, Kenya, Nigeria, Cameroon at the same time in the same platform, I think is beautiful because traditionally people are, again, used to their silos. If you think about when we designed our training program, if we ran it in Lagos, it would have just been people who lived in Lagos who were in Nigeria learning together. But now, like you're learning with really diverse range of people with different experiences. And you can also learn from those different experiences as well. So the learning is not just limited to the actual academic part, but there are also non-academic things that you're learning as part of that kind of like cohort system.
Very good, thanks.
I would choose the gamified learning.
Okay, so please tell us about how would you set it up?
So obviously you need a platform, and this is a web-based platform best. You need content, so the learning content itself. You need to have a mixture of video and text-based materials within it. So preferably, you design a curriculum, you create content around that curriculum. Some of those content are text-based that people need to read, but my suggestion is that you minimize that as secondary learning. So like you have like short form video content, it could be like 5 to 10 minutes long. And then you can refer people to the additional learning material, which is the text-based material for them to then go through subsequently. You need to have assignments for every single module as a way to kind of like demonstrate learning. So this is kind of like that whole idea of like self-paced and project-based learning. So you need to provide tasks for people to complete. You need to provide a basic quiz system as well, which is very important to kind of like an automated way for you to validate understanding very quickly. So like, 5 to 10 questions, preferably around 5 questions that people can answer just to demonstrate basic understanding of the module that just been completed. Obviously, because this is a platform, you have a sign-in system. So people register, create profiles. You have to create this profile in a very social way. So allow people to kind of like include their social media profiles, add photos, talk about themselves. I would also encourage you to kind of like do things like video introductions, like so get people to kind of like do like basic video selfies where they talk about themselves and their objectives. Outline, clarify expectations from the onset. So define what people are going to accomplish by going through this learning course. And then ask them what they hope to accomplish before they start so that you can align expectations. Because one of the biggest challenges is when people have misplaced objectives, right? I want to learn how to get to the moon and you're teaching me how to drive a car, right? It feels like I'm not achieving what I wanted to achieve, but you never intended to get me to the moon. You just intended to get me to learn how to drive a car. And then, you have your basic achievement systems. You have leaderboards as an example, you have achievements, you have badges, you have point systems. So, I mean, you don't need all of them, but, some of them might work. Then you have, rewards, things like certificate of completion. So when people are done, you need to issue them some kind of certificate, but ensure that you're only issuing people who've demonstrated understanding, the certificate of completion towards the end. Yeah, I mean, like that's kind of like my general sort of like,
Yeah, very interesting. But could you identify for us what would be your secret favorite game mechanic that you love to integrate in such systems? So is there anything that you're always trying to integrate in such a system?
So my biggest one is notification. So built-in notification, like whenever you launch something, you get a notification saying, oh, well done on launching this stuff. When you complete something, whoa, well done, you have completed. One of my personal best is, something like only 10% of the people that started actually got to this point. So you're already in the 10 percentile, right? I love that because obviously my traditional finance background means that I love data. But I think just giving people an indication as to, like how far they've come. And then the other thing that I also love is you are here. So essentially designing a process map to say, this is your starting point, this is your end point, these are the different levels that you need to progress. And as the user progresses through the system, you let them know where they are relative to the end goal and relative to the start point. I think like those kind of like visual feedback, again, if designed into the system, is great, because if you are doing a 5-month training course, it's easy for you to feel overwhelmed with time. But if you get this constant feedback, which is designed around notifications that just says, only 10% or only 20% of the people that started made it to this point. You are, like 60% from completion. It's just like, okay, now I need to kind of like just give it a little bit more. It's like, don't quit. So that is,
I think that's amazing. So we have notifications, we have direct feedback on what you're doing, you have comparing with your peers, and we have the path to mastery, basically the progress that you are doing within the system.
Yeah.
Very important elements, I think. Yeah.
And sorry, let me just add, in addition to that, is community. Community is one of the most valuable. So designing the community around it is extremely important. And that community needs to have a community manager. It needs to have content on its own. And this is where people can go to either during the learning or after the learning to go and discover new things, new opportunities, right? So again, training in isolation is insufficient, right? So yeah.
I see. Very good. And what is the things, the pitfalls that we might face? So what are the things, if we want to set up a gamified learning experience, that we should avoid?
Oh wow. That one I've never I only see upsides. Obviously one of the big challenges, if I wouldn't think about this from a learning standpoint, but from a team standpoint, is obviously, we're sitting behind the screen a lot, we're missing on the human interaction. We are isolated. So we're developing a different set of, we're not enhancing our social skills. So I think like this is the potential pitfall.
Mm-hmm.
So it would be great if you had local community engagement or offline engagements. But again, this is obviously even more challenging when the geographic spread is very wide in our case. And then, the resource required to kind of like support that is also very limited. But I think that the biggest pitfall is this kind of like lack of social development in a way. So, because people are now very comfortable with this, being isolated in their learning, and they don't realize that, like learning is not just, there's also a social component to it. So that is something that if I think long term, that we should figure out ways to solve. So obviously we've benefited from, like I said, from the, from having this kind of like dispersed learning, but it also comes at a cost.
I see. Yeah. So we have a problem of potential isolation, and you are encouraging us to kind of have also the possibility to interact on a physical space, basically, and build a community. Very good.
Correct. So this could be one way to do this is towards the end of the program, as an example, is to then organize physical workshops where people congregate, again, depending on if this is like a multi-country strategy or if it's a single country strategy. You can organize physical workshop and then invite people from all over to come there, especially top participants. The other thing that I should also mention in terms of the tools that I'd like to use within gamification is a reward tool. So, if you make it to the end, you will get invited to this physical event where you get to meet all of these other people. So that's an incentive for you to want to, again, continue to invest the time in the learning.
I see. Yeah, makes sense. Yeah. So I think we are almost through this interview. Is there any last words from you that you want to share with the community? Anything that you want to highlight?
I mean, for me, like I said, Africa has a potential big problem, but also potentially a huge opportunity. I think that there is a very big need for upskilling the, hundreds of millions of youth. And we need to think about this in an innovative fashion. We need to do this at scale. And we need to tap into individual motivations as we do this. So understanding the systems, getting feedback from the community, and leveraging that feedback to improve whatever systems that we have. So we don't design a system and then say it's perfect, right? We need to test that system, understand how users are interacting with that system, apply the feedback, apply those learnings to improve it. So there's always an increment, there's always an improvement that can be done. And it's over time that you then build a proper system. So it's never going to be straight out of the box. It's never going to be perfect. But just understand that there is a learning curve to go through to improve a system like that. Because ultimately, what that system should deliver is a self-service system, like a vending machine, right? You go in there, you choose the product, you put your money in, it delivers, everyone is happy, no human interaction.
That's a good statement for the end. No human interaction. Nice. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much, Hugo, for all your very valuable insights. It was great speaking to you, and I'm sure that the participants will have a lot out of this interview and out of your lessons learned that you received so far. Thanks for being with us today, and I wish you a wonderful day.